All right.
What page?
We're on page 49, chapter 11, Meanwhile Out West. Okay? No homework tonight, no videos other than this one. You might want to review the chapter if you care to. We're also going to talk about some of the trails. There's no handout for that. I'm just going to do some reading on that in class. Okay. All right. They talk about how there was a war in the West. It was the new settlers fighting the Indians, okay? The buffalo and nature for control of the land. Buffaloes are dumb, but even they had been smart. Even if they'd been smart, they didn't have a chance. Nature, and when I first read this, I was like, what? Because it says, well, nature is tough, but it's no match for man. And I was like, baloney, okay? But they're talking about how when they got there, they might be trees that were 600 years old, and they chopped them down. You know, so that's what they're talking about. So in that case, they're right, unfortunately. Okay. Big areas like Wisconsin's cut over were just left. I mean, it just couldn't even grow anything. They just stripped the land so bad at times. But, you know, it talks about how some people was worried about the environment. In the early 1800s, mid 1800s, probably wasn't as worried about the environment as we are today. Okay. As for the Indians, that was a different story. They were actually intelligent and resourceful, but they were outnumbered, outgunned. They didn't have much of a chance either. Okay, so the settlers had been fighting Indian wars since 1631, and the wars, no matter what people said, were over the same thing: land. Okay. The Native Americans did not particularly care for people coming in and trying to settle their land, their sacred hunting ground sometimes. Yes.
Like, Native Americans believe like no one should own land.
Yep.
So they have actually a lot of gods, and they believe it's everyone's land.
Yep.
But these lands belong to the buffalo, the deer, and all that stuff. And like, if someone were to be on their hunting grounds, like think about it. You're living there, you kind of depend on your hunting land, and then people clearing it and building a house on your hunting lands.
That's it. You're exactly right.
That's not going to help hunting.
And that's what happened. And when buffaloes were essential to life for the Native Americans.
They used every part.
And they used every part. And they only killed what they needed. They didn't go out and kill.
Slaughter.
And to slaughter entire herds. They killed what they needed. And they did. They used every part of it. They used the skins for clothing, for tents, for blankets. They ate the meat. They even used the bones to turn them into weapons and tools and things. I mean, everything was used.
Like, and that's why there's not many left, because like the white settlers and the settlers would literally just shoot them out of the trains.
Yep,
and then they just take the hide off and leave the body to sit all the meat.
Yep, and that's where I was going next. And when the settlers started coming out and settling the West, and especially once the trains started passing through,
they didn't want the meat.
They would stop. Yeah, they would stop. They would see a herd of buffaloes, and they would stop and let the men get off and shoot the buffaloes and just leave them there to rot, just to waste. So obviously, when you're counting on that animal for your livelihood, you're not real happy to see that, okay? Because they didn't have big freezers and refrigerators. It's not like they could go out and go, hey, wow, thanks a lot. You know, we'll harvest all this now and store it for the next 6 years, you know. No, they couldn't do that. So it was worthless. Okay, it was worthless. They just killed them for sport. They killed them for sport. You still have people that does that. You got people now that goes out and hunts. They hunt for sport. I was always taught if you kill something, you eat it. I mean, you use it. You don't just kill the kill.
Hunting because my grandpa owns a big farm.
I'm
All right.
a squirrel, but I'm not gonna eat it. I don't care. I'm not gonna eat it.
Well, then you shouldn't shoot it.
Not
We have a big fest
That's
out.
very annoying. That's
Okay,
poaching.
stop.
It's literally
All right.
yard, Leo.
Stop.
No, they're
Okay, the part where I say stop. It's the part where we stop. Okay, don't keep going. Thank you. Okay? Now, so the Indian Wars actually goes on for about 30 years, believe it or not. Okay? It's hard to blame the people who took their land. They were just ordinary people who were told that they was free land out west. Okay, our government is trying to settle the West, so we have to have these things, and we're going to talk about this later on in our studies. Homestead Acts, where the government is like a big race, and when you get to a section of land that you want, you can stake it, and the government gave you 160 acres of land. The thing was, you had to build a home on it, you had to farm it, or
Have some
something.
occupation.
You had to have a house, and you had to stay on it for 5 years. Okay, so you couldn't just stake it out and then turn around and sell it to somebody else and try to make money. You had, in order for it to be yours, you had to have stipulations. But, you're back again, you're giving away land that technically you don't own. Okay, so no one actually owned it. So, okay. So a lot of the settlers were afraid because they've been told these awful, untrue stories about Native Americans. They thought all Indians were savages, and I always get tickled when I read that, because it's like Hart said. Now, these people had never been introduced to God or Jesus or anything like that. Okay, they never, but they knew that there was something greater than them out there.
Yeah, they
'Cause they
respected
had-
it too.
Yeah, and they respected. They had a God for everything. I mean, they had a God for harvest, they had a God for hunting, a God for war, a rain, everything. So they knew there was something greater than them. They just didn't understand there was only one God.
A lot better than us, though.
Yeah, but they knew there was something, I mean, you know, and we refer to them as the savages, but yet they had grasped that you know, something created this.
And they
This came from
respected-
somewhere.
They respected nature too.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, like something.
Okay. So some of the things that drove people out east or out west from the east at the time was an economic downturn in the east. A lot of people were losing their jobs and things like that. So they were moving west, trying to find a better opportunities. Some people just wanted, you know, the adventure, so they moved out. You had all the get rich quick. Everybody's discovering gold and all this stuff. You had people reading the basically dime store novels about some of the cowboys and things later on. And that inspires young men to go out thinking they're going to be gunslingers and gamblers
And on the way
all
there, they
this
get killed
stuff.
by enemies.
yeah. So you got a lot of things going on there that is causing people to go out west. Okay.
And then the smart people were like, okay, everybody else is gonna go, and then we'll have all the
And some people did. Some people did. Now, we're talking about Oregon fever, okay? Now, that's not mean, it doesn't mean you come down with an illness or something. That's not what Oregon fever was, okay? Men got the urge to travel into the unsettled region of the far west more often, okay? And when they got this urge, it was referred to as Oregon fever. It's just they wanted to pack up and go, okay? They wanted to move across country, basically, not knowing what was out there, what was waiting for them, but they had heard wonderful stories, and they was ready to take that chance, okay? So many farmers and families were poured towards Oregon Territory and other western lands by the descriptions that they had heard or read about from people who lived there or had seen the land. The attraction of practically free land, rumored to be, and it was talking about how it was great farmland, great hunting, all this. So, you know, you're seeing the grass is greener on the other side, if you've ever heard that. Okay, so you're thinking you're moving to, you're trying, if you can get there, you're going to be in paradise. Okay, so that was a big inspiration there. Okay, it also lured the farmers who thought that, you know, it's going to be great farmland, especially if they had big families to feed and things like that. So they're getting pretty excited about this. Okay. While most immigrants on the west realized that you had danger involved in the travel, the draw was still incredibly strong. Okay. Some families had already moved across Ohio and Kentucky, Kansas, Missouri, and other states looking for better land. So these pioneer farmers had been unsuccessful in farming where they had settled, and so they were attracted to, again, the thought of being able to, you know, find that perfect area, that perfect piece of land that they could farm and make their a living at. Okay. Economic pressures. People traveled west for many reasons. often, it was because of economic circumstances, okay? You did have the economic turn down, personal financial failures. People owed money to the banks. Land back east, the land value is going up really fast. So it's harder to afford. And the desire for a better life pushed families west. And some people just wanted to live in the untamed land. Didn't want a bunch of neighbors around them and stuff, okay? They just wanted to be out.
This sounds like my dad. That literally sounds like my dad.
Yeah. It sounds like most of us old guys, especially the older we get. All right, reluctant travelers. So not everybody was excited about this. Believe it or not, men were really eager to move west and brave the dangers of the trails.
Until they got there.
But the wives, the smart ones in the crowd, and the children were often a little bit more reluctant to go. Okay? So you think about it, women was more realistic about the dangers that the families might encounter. They recognized that they would never see aging parents again. I mean, think about it. If you was loading up and joining a wagon train, and it was going to take you months to get all the way across this country.
Say goodbye, yeah.
Yeah, when you said goodbye, you were probably saying goodbye. Okay, because there was you weren't going to jump on a plane and fly back. Letters did not get out there in just a matter of a couple of days.
It took like a year.
Okay, it took a while. By the time you got a letter saying that your mom or dad had taken ill,
They might have been dead for
they
6
had
months.
probably already been passed away and been buried before you even got the letter saying that they were sick. So when you said goodbye, you were actually saying goodbye. Okay, so the women was a little bit more reluctant to do that. Okay, and I get that. They recognized that they would never see their aging parents or relatives again, and they worried what would happen to their children if something happened to both she and her husband. Who's going to take care of the kids? Who's going to look after them? Okay, there's no family to take them in. We don't have orphanage everywhere. I mean, we're out in the middle of the wilderness here. There might not be anybody for miles around. So who's going to take? And so they were concerned about that, and rightfully so. Now, 1 out of every 5 women that traveled along the Oregon Trail was expecting at some point in time along that trail. They were expecting a baby. That would be a tough journey without being with child. I'm going to tell you, an old wooden wagon on wooden wheels over rough terrain. Okay, they got old wagon roads.
It's
perhaps.
not pavement.
Yeah, they might have wagon roads, but it's not. Yeah, it's real rough. If it rains, it's gonna wash it out in places. I mean, this is not a comfortable ride by any means, anyhow.
No, it would be hard. It would be hard being full of food. Imagine being full of a baby.
That's a good point. Okay. Giving birth along the route was more dangerous than at home because women back in those days did give birth at home because there was no hospitals to go to. Okay. Most suspected women worked every day on the trip right up until the time that their babies were born. Sometimes those leaders would be reluctant to stop. Okay. They were on a timetable. You got to get past certain rivers at certain times of the year. You got to get through mountain passes a certain time of the year. Otherwise, you might not make it. Okay, so they're thinking about more than just the one family here. Okay. Sometimes the wagon train would go ahead and the family would have to catch up if they could.
Oh my
Okay,
gosh.
so an expected woman would get help from older women or other mothers during the delivery, since there was no doctors usually traveling with a wagon train. Okay, now accidents was another one. They were not uncommon on the long trip. Now the last class laughed at this, but before you laugh, I want you to think about it. Let's talk about how some children fell or they jumped off the wagon,
Makes sense.
and then they would get. A lot of times, yeah, they would fall in that wagon. The wagons are being pulled by oxen, and they're loaded down with everything these people own. And if you fall in front of it, then it's going to run you down, and it's going to hurt you. really bad, if not kill you, okay? And somebody said, well, how did they fall off? Well, we're back again. Rough roads, wooden wheels.
And it's a child. They're curious.
If you're tired, if you nod off, you ever nodded off in a car and kind of, yeah. And you're not going to fall out of the car because you got, see, they're just sitting up there, they're sitting on a wooden seat.
No, it's actually a wooden bench.
So
it's not a seat.
it's not real good, okay? Okay, so the wheels would sometimes break. They could, if you were trying to work on it, there was a chance you could get pinned under the wagon because they didn't have hydraulic jacks that they could jack that thing up with. People are trying to hold it up and put stuff under it to help hold it up to get the wheel back on. Riders were sometimes thrown from their horses. Children and adults were drowned in river crossings, okay, because you're trying to cross this river, and back again, if you don't hit it just right, it's deeper than you think it is. There's a flowing river. Anytime you're trying to cross a flowing river, it can be dangerous, okay?
So really any flowing body of water.
Yeah, so that's not good. And of course, you had snakes on land and in the water, okay? Because you would have them where the snakes, the horses can get spooked by snakes. If they see snakes in the water, it will spook a horse.
Been there.
And if they start, they'll throw people off, and if they throw you off and you land right in the middle of all those snakes, you're going to get bit. Okay, and these are poisonous snakes.
Not been there.
Okay, now there was times that they had to unload the wagons in order to try to go up some of the mountain passes. Okay, yeah, they had to set stuff off. But then, think about this: you've got oxens pulling. You got people with ropes up ahead pulling it. You got people behind it pushing it. So that's the recipe for disaster. But once they crest, now they're going down. Well, they can't just let this thing go rolling down through there willy-nilly. Okay, then it's going to crash and you're not going to have a wagon. So they got to ease it down. So now you got people behind it with ropes trying to pull it and keep it from going too fast. And you got people out in front of it trying to slow it down. So yeah, this is not a fun trip. Okay, they don't show all this on the old westerns and things. It just
They show the end part.
Yeah, it leaves a lot of this off. Okay, now diseases and death was constant facts of life to everyone living in the 19th century. But life on a trail made the problem even worse. Okay, smallpox, cholera, and other contagious diseases killed travelers. Measles, scarlet fever, chicken pox, just the cold and common childhood diseases was more deadly on the trail because remember when we talked about immigrants? Yeah, they're eating, but they're not getting the most nutritious meals. They're putting in long days, very hard days. So they're tired. And the nutrition is not there. So their immune system is not as strong as it would be. So they're more susceptible to diseases. People are kind of crowded together, again, even on a wagon train, you're kind of crowded together a lot of times. So if somebody got something, it's easier to spread, okay? So this is not good, okay? Drinking waters could get contaminated. All these things is happening, okay?
It sounds like the 4th grade study of people on the expeditions on the ships, like stuff. It's basically an expedition, kind of.
It is.
Travel. So.
It is. It is.
But it kind of feels like that because there was disease, the water would go bad, the food would go bad.
Yeah. There's not a lot of difference. Not a lot of difference in what the immigrants faced coming over on a ship. You're right. Yes, Brian. Yep. It must be history. All right. Broadcast the tinkle. All right. All right. All along the route, travelers would see graves and the scattered bones of men, women, and children that had died on previous trips. Now, buddy, that would be a morale booster, wouldn't it?
Oh, okay.
You're already at the wit's end, and all of a sudden you come across
skeletons
of people that had passed on previous trips. You're like, oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now,
You gotta go back.
very few wagon trains, believe it or not, very few wagon trains were attacked by Native American tribes. Okay? Now, the movies and the TV shows, this shows every wagon train was attacked at least 4 times. You know? But that really wasn't the case. It did happen, but not that often. Okay? It was very rare. Most often, Indians tried to threaten the travelers into leaving. They would steal their horses, things of that nature.
Yeah,
Only
but
about 4% of the deaths results from fighting with Indians. That's about 4 out of every 100 people that died on these trails died from actually fighting Indians. Okay, it was usually disease, death in childbirth, exhaustion that killed them. Okay. Now, here you go. Most wagon trains elected the leaders to settle disputes and make decisions for the good of the group. The leaders were chosen for their ability to make good decisions and to get along with people. But often they had to make very hard decisions and tough decisions, okay? Again, remember, they're thinking about maybe 100 people on this wagon train, not just one family of 5. Okay, so they're taking all this into account. So sometimes families were told if they were lagging behind, they had to unload personal effects. Might have been a piece of furniture or something that was very dear to them. Don't care, leave it behind. You're too slow. Okay, you got to leave it behind. Unload it. Take some of the weight off your wagon. If a person had cholera or smallpox, which is highly contagious, their wagon was left behind, okay, in order to protect the rest of the group. Now they could trail them from a distance, but they could not come up and be part of the wagon train. And when the wagon train stopped at night to rest, they had to stay on the outskirts, okay? They were not allowed to come near the people, okay? Okay. On the journey west to Oregon, travelers jumped off, that was the starting spot, from either Independence or St. Joseph, Missouri, from Independence, and get this, they had to travel the first 200 miles across the Great Plains to the Platte River, which they then followed up with 450 miles through what is now Nebraska and into Wyoming. Then they followed the Sweetwater River until it reached the South Pass, and that's up in the Rockies. That's the easiest route through the Rockies. Now remember, they had to get to Missouri before they even started. So if you was coming from North Carolina, you had to get to Missouri on your own. That wasn't part of the wagon train. So you've already logged in a few hundred miles before you even start your journey. Okay? West of the Rockies, the trails followed a series of smaller rivers and streams until travelers reached the Snake River in Idaho. Next, the wagon train climbed the rugged Blue Mountains on the eastern border of Oregon, and then followed the trail along the Columbia River for about 200 miles until it reached the Dalles, where pioneers loaded their wagons onto rafts and forged the river. Okay? So travelers then floated down the rapids and dangerous Columbia River, often losing all of their possessions in the final stage of the journey. After 1846, a wagon train was used through the Cascade Mountains to the Willamette Valley, and in both cases, however, the last leg of the journey was very dangerous and often deadly. Okay? Now, we talked about how they had to get through certain places, and this is why. Some wagon trains hired guides who knew the route. Usually these were mountain men or ex-mountain men who had traveled the area before. Together, the leaders and the guides would choose the route to follow. But many wagon trains used guidebooks. And these guidebooks was actually written and drawn out by people who had never been out west. So they really didn't know the territory at all. So what would happen is they were usually inaccurate, okay? So wagon trains would take cutoffs, which was supposed to save them days, sometimes weeks on their trip, only to run into trouble and then have to backtrack, and now they're behind days or weeks because it actually wasn't a cut through at all, okay? And a lot of times there was no water to be found in the areas that they were sending them to and things like that, okay? Yes, dear?
Can I use the restroom?
Yes. Now, and this is why you want to make sure you get through the passage on time. Everybody's heard about this, I know. The Donner Party. Okay, no. Okay. The Donner Party was one group of travelers
Oh, yeah, yeah.
that took a cutoff recommended in a guidebook.
I've heard this one.
It got them into the Sierra Nevada mountain passes so late that they were snowed in. And we're not talking snowed in for a day or two. We're talking snowed in for the winter. We're talking a few months here, a couple, 3 months. They are snowed in. They cannot leave.
And they couldn't get any food.
Yeah, and they don't have enough supplies for that because they were supposed to be where they were going, okay? So, 34 members died from starvation.
Yeah, they couldn't eat.
They ate all the animals. They ate all the leather harnesses and belts, anything that was made out of animal that they could boil probably in water and eat. They did. And then at the very last, in order to survive, they had to turn to cannibalism and actually eat. They didn't kill anyone and eat them, but they did indeed have to eat the dead, the people that had died from starvation in order to survive.
That is terrible.
Okay? The survivors crossed the mountains, okay, and even in the deep snow, they managed to finally get out, but they had lost everything they owned, except for their lives. And they were frowned upon. People looked at them differently once the story started coming out, what they had done. Just kind of the way some of you are sitting here with your eyes wide open and your mouths agape, like, I'd have never done that.
Yeah, you will.
Yeah, don't be so short. All right, bye.